Hello and welcome to the World Hatchery Forum, a webinar series focused on practical solutions for aquaculture hatchery managers. Through 4 webinars, the series will discuss fish and shrimp feeds and genetics, as well as recent equipment and technology innovations. My name is Lucía Barreiro. I am editor of Hatchery Feed and Management, and I will be your moderator. Today, we start the series with a webinar that will focus on shrimp hatcheries and will discuss innovative shrimp feeds, management, and genetics. Today's webinar is sponsored by Benchmark Genetics, Molofeed, and Skretting. Each speaker will give a 15-minute presentation, and then we will get to a final panel session to answer questions from the audience. To send me the question, please type it in the Q&A box. And a special thanks to our assistant editor and webinar manager, Marisa Yanaga, for making all things work. Now let's start with the first presentation. The first speaker was announced to be Tony Duiland, but she's unable to attend, and Eamonn O'Brien will take over. Eamonn started his aquaculture career in salmon farming, but quickly switched to marine larval production, where he developed new species technology for several commercial species. Following that, he was asked to join a Belgian hatchery feed company to provide technical service to marine larval fish hatcheries, and then became a commercial product manager for marine fish. 15 years ago, Eamonn joined Skretting to spearhead the development of a new specialty unit focused on marine hatchery feeds development. Eamonn's presentation title is Shrimp Hatchery Feeding for Improved Industrial Production. Eamonn, hand it over to you.
Thanks, Lucia and Marisa, for inviting me to speak today. So yeah, as you can hopefully see, I am not Tonya, so I've filled in at short notice. I'd like to kick off these webinars by perhaps taking an alternative and hopefully refreshing approach to these type of events. No doubt over the coming days, we will hear great and exciting things from each vendor, and everybody will have superior products and so on, which is great. But I would like to take the opportunity to more question how we approach production and explore how we can actually perpetually improve production methods that lead to a better and more sustainable industry. So despite the dip during COVID, global shrimp production continues to increase, with India and Ecuador, of course, leading the drive. More recent horrific events in Ukraine and continued COVID situation in China continue to cast doubts throughout the global economy, coupled with staggering global inflation. Rising costs is something that we will touch all aspects of production, especially, of course, raw material costs, feed, transportation, and energy costs. It's even possible that costs might become a secondary problem, and actual availability of primary raw materials could become a limiting factor. Something else as well that we must remember is the important social contribution hatcheries play in supporting local livelihood in often low-income regions. Now, over the past few years, the shrimp industry has had to adapt to lower prices, and this has fueled really excellent innovations in farming practice to reduce cost and time of culture. Recently, our colleagues in Skretting, Ecuador, presented a very nice overview of production models in shrimp farming in the search for efficiency and cost reduction, taking into account various scenarios of low shrimp prices. Of course, the COVID situation was a totally different beast. Not only did prices continue to collapse, demand had disappeared, which led to a highly volatile shrimp hatchery stocking and demand. Now, in recent months, as we emerge from COVID, production prices and demand has rebounded, but global inflation and transportation costs and continued uncertainty in China continue to drive a need for perpetual improved production methodologies. Now, it's not all doom and gloom as well, but not to add to our industry woes, emerging diseases even continued to develop in these times of reduced stocking periods. So we must remain vigilant as we enter a period now of renewed production intensification. It's essential that standards and practices are not sacrificed for cost. We need to ensure that the industry continues to forge a path for sustainable and responsible healthy food production, and that it's done in the most economical way possible. At a hatchery level, life start sets life performance. This is a concept that's well understood in terrestrial animal production and is increasingly adapted and applied in aquaculture. Hatcheries form the heart of the industry, and their output is essential to ensuring the optimal performance of the industry and forms the basis for any production improvements. We see, of course, that the hatchery is a very complex organism of interdependent sectors that require precision management and best management practices. Deviations in any of these sectors, even for a short period of time, can lead to serious implications within the hatchery. A multitude of tasks need to be simultaneously precision managed. The overall objective should be the production of the most robust, healthiest post-larvae to power the industry, but of course, at a profit. Here, there are enormous differences in economy of scale benefits to be realized through vertical integration instead of a classic hatchery versus farm model. So when we look at any production economic model, output or yield per expenditure always wins out over cost cutting. In our world, we often refer to survival, but sometimes in a quite selective way. We often neglect tanks that have crashed or failed, but all of these add to the total cost of production. We also need to clarify increasing yield doesn't necessarily mean higher and higher stocking densities. In this case, we refer more to reducing losses. So let's look at some of the important bottlenecks in shrimp hatchery production. Well, starting with broodstock, the shrimp industry still relies heavily on the use of fresh feeds. So the elimination of certain high-risk fresh feeds, already common in other countries, together with the use of high-quality formulated diets, will become the standard to help maintain the SPF status of broodstock and quality monopoly. Genetic gains that have been developed, whether they are for growth and or more robust animals, still require feeds that are not contaminated with or sourced from regions of infectious diseases. In the past, it was deemed impossible to successfully condition broodstock without bloodworms and various other fresh feed components. In this commercial farm trial in Mexico, we could demonstrate that replacing most of the fresh feed components with a specialized broodstock diet and supplements with Californian squid yielded the same result. In fact, making what people told us was impossible actually possible. Another approach is to complement the existing feeds. So even when polychaetes are used, it's possible to supercharge the performance by complementing the animals with a high-end broodstock diet, such as Vitalis 2.5, giving higher mating and higher monopoly per female performance. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges faced in shrimp hatcheries are the losses incurred during the zoeomyces, in particular the zoea 2 syndrome. Pictures here on the right outline typical characteristics of this issue, and it can be particularly bad during the rainy season. There's no single solution to this, but there are three key items that need to be managed: broodstock monopoly quality, of course the water quality, and finally the algae. Very important that we have clean algae, that we have enough algae, and that also the feeding system for the algae is also kept clean and as sterile as possible. If we look at some of the other cost factors, by far the biggest feed cost factor in shrimp hatchery production comes from Artemia. Typically, Artemia represents more than $300 per million PLs produced, which is in fact more than 50% of the total feed cost inputs. Artemia use can be optimized, and you can see a big variation here in the quantities of Artemia that are used in different countries around the world. So its use can be optimized, and recent innovations can also help to reduce the cost of ownership associated with Artemia, such as pre-hatched Artemia and disinfected monopoly. Differences in source, strain, and year class can have a large impact on performance and predictability as well. The Artemia resources are under pressure, as you can see with this link here from CNN. Great Salt Lake is shrinking fast due to water diversion. So we need to think about alternatives. We need to have a plan B for the future. But for now, what we could also say is, how can we get more out of Artemia? Enrichment actually of Artemia offers a possibility to enhance the nutritional quality and physical biomass of the monopoly, effectively creating more biomass meat to persist for your post-larvae. The use of new generation enrichment products such as Orient 3, which don't rely on eutrophic emulsions, can increase the overall quality and vitality of the Artemia. When compared to feeding non-enriched Artemia, Artemia that had been enriched with REN3 show approximately 10% increase in weight and survival compared to non-enriched at PL10. So this offers an effective method to enhance outputs. Longer term, of course, we expect further development on advanced formulated diets and alternative superior live feeds. The key here, of course, is to provide viable alternatives for sustainable growth of the industry. It's not about saying you can or cannot use Artemia. It will be one of the tools in the toolbox, but we will need to develop more tools as well to ensure long-term viability. Finally, feeds. Success in the hatchery does not depend on one single factor. The three main pillars of feed, environment, and genetics must be kept in balance. Certainly, it's possible to leverage one against the other, and the advances, as I'm sure we'll see very soon from our colleagues in Benchmark, that genetic strains exemplify this. But it should be noted that one single item by itself will not improve production. All of these three need to work together to get the true value out of it and to really complement each other. However, as production intensifies, feeds will also need to match that progress and should not create instability, as feed loads will also need to increase to match the increased biomass. Today, however, we see a massive variation in feeding practices, with the consultant or the manager managing their proprietary blend of different diets. So why do they do that? Well, in shrimp hatcheries, it's a very common practice to use a wide variety of different larval diets depending on the wishes of the technician. This is then exacerbated in some ways by the use of many different additives at different stages as well. So this leads to a lot of complexities in production. Very often just the size of the different diets can vary by more than 100%, which further complicates the ability to standardize the production outputs. So the use of advanced and more sustainable formulas of higher quality and more physically stable diets will improve hatchery success and overall quality robustness of the animals transferred into the ongoing. So we think it's time to change this scenario and really look at the diets and how they will physically impact within the system, and try to tackle all these points together, and rather than just looking for a single magic solution to an impossible equation. And here we like to say, actually, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, not adding more and more different variations or variables into the equation. Now, all feeds are not created equal, and I would strongly recommend anybody that's joining us today to take a look at your feeds under the microscope. The feeds you see here, they're all supposed to be 300 microns in size. And when you look at them on the microscope, you can actually physically see a massive variation in the diet quality. But when we plot the size dispersion, we can see a lot of the diets have a lot of very, very small particles, and some of them have even bigger particles. So this will give a lot of variation in production, and these excess fines and oversized particles will add a lot of extra load into the system. And then mixing, of course, these diets in a cocktail approach only makes this problem worse. So what happens when we feed a high quality diet in a commercial hatchery against an established cocktail mixture? Well, we did this as a hatchery in Brazil, actually, and they have, as you can see here, 8 different cocktail mixtures that they feed at different stages. And this is something, of course, that they have established over years of production, fine-tuned and so on. So we said, okay, what happens if we just feed our diet and nothing else, no other cocktails, no other flakes or anything like that either? And we did this all the way through the 3 different stages. First stage to PL2, second stage to PL8, and then the third stage out for PL17. Well, what we saw was something very, very interesting. We got a higher survival. We had 75% survival versus 62. We actually had less feed being used, approximately 20% less feed as well. We got very nice coloration of the hepatopancreas with good lipid globules and a very nice digestive tract with a thicker muscle to gut ratio. Other practical improvements as well. We had cleaner tanks because of this less losses and organic load, which also then meant that the tanks themselves could be harvested faster and less stressful for the animals as well. Another important point is the quality of the animals coming out of the hatchery. And what we see here is that when we measure what we call the energy reserve measurement, compared to feeding a high quality diet with 62% protein versus a lower quality diet with 42% protein, the first 7 days of stocking, we see a big difference in the growth potential of the animals, where we go up to 70 milligrams, whereas the controls are at approximately 60 milligrams. But more importantly, we see more robust larvae. So feeding the animals when they're just transferred to the ponds is notoriously difficult, very difficult to do with any degree of accuracy. So a lot of the animals actually tend to starve. They don't get encountering the feed very, very well in the first days. And what we see is that throughout the period, the animals that have been fed on the higher quality diet, they show much higher survival as the days progress compared to a lower quality feed. And we can measure this then in situ in real time at commercial farms. So this is an example of the energy reserve measurement survival at day 4, when we compare PLs that have been fed different diets. And there's an enormous variation in the quality that comes out. Of course, there might be differences due to the genetic strain or what actually happened within the hatchery, but it's very, very clear that the feed plays a very, very big role in the early life stages, and which will have further downstream effects on saving. Finally, shrimp hatchery production is a specialized field. Here in Skretting, we have a specialist team focused on this livestock segment to ensure that we are in tune with the industry needs, that we develop the best diets and also deliver the solution through our local network so we can play our part in feeding the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll leave you with a last slide, just to a bit of shameless advertising for our Aquavision conference next month, and look forward to the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamonn. Thank you for the great presentation. Our next speaker is Paulo Lage. Luis is Technical Aquaculture R&D Manager at Molofeed. In more than 10 years working on shrimp aquaculture with a few animal nutrition companies and collaborating with important researchers worldwide, he accrued a wealth of expertise in shrimp metabolism and nutrition. Luis is back in Brazil to lead Molofeed's aquaculture R&D team on its advanced larval nutrition research. Located in northern Brazil, Molofeed's experimental facility focuses on hatchery feeds, feeding strategies, and best practices. The title of his presentation is Precision Feed as a Tool to Help Larval Shrimp Farmers Reduce Overfeeding. Luis, hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about our tool. So I will present to you the precision feeding a tool to optimize hatchery results. I would like to apologize about my voice. I'm a little bit sick. I'm sorry. Does hatchery efficiency sound good to you? And what do you think about it? You cannot say just survival. When you talk about hatchery efficiency, normally you look at survival, but it's quite larger than this. With high survival, you have larger yields and consequently increase the profits. So what is required to get there? One point is optimizing feed regime, so avoid overfeeding, to use good quality feed, to have good algae, as Eamonn said as well, not contamination. Pay attention about Artemia to not feed on excess. Be able to estimate correctly your population and also adapt the quantity of feed that you are delivering for your real population or biomass, and optimize nursery conditions concerned to the water quality, the parameters, physical, chemical parameters, biosecurity for sure, because this is a very sorry, because in hatcheries it's very important to take care about the biosecurity, to have the SOP well established and avoiding contamination. I mean, from one tank to another tank, or when the contamination pathogen become from outside. As outcome, you have produce robust animals and as well avoid the use of antibiotics. As you know, the aquaculture and hatchery rely on the three pillars: nutrition, management, and genetics, and they don't work by themselves. They work together. They have important role, and I cannot push just one to try to get my best result. I have to combine all of them to achieve my goal. When you're talking about marine hatchery, you have to talk about Artemia. Artemia helped to develop the marine hatchery so far. Today, you can see with the feed on the market that Artemia can be partially replaced. However, had some negative points. For example, is the high feed cost concerned to use of Artemia. It's also source of contamination, bacterial contamination, for example, Vibrio. So it is hardly recommended to use some kind of disinfection before feeding, and avoid excess feeding. Once I heard the phrase, we are what we eat, so it's the microbiota of the animal is related with the kind of feed they are fed. Today, the main challenge of the hatcheries is to have a precision feeding or optimized feeding, achieve high survival, good survival, produce larvae on quality, and have also friend cost, reduce the cost. This is what we aim for. And feed has an important role on this aspect, because the cost for sure, and when they're using a poor quality feed, you have water pollution, and you can decrease your results. So I introduced to you the Molofeed precision feeding, and what it is precision feeding and how does it work. This tool works better for animals in early and late PL, I mean from PL1 to PL10. At this stage, they are normally fed 12 times per day, so every 2 hours. So you must collect the animals 1 hour after the last meal. Fix the animal to stop the gut evacuation. Check the animals at the microscope and score the gut content. As you can see here on this table, when you have the pathopancreas full and the gut totally full, you score the animal as 4. And as the intestine content will decrease, you reduce also the score. Assuming that you have sampled 10 animals, you have the total of 40. So as you find your scores, your total, you have the action here on the table. So you can increase the feeding offer or reduce. So adjust the feed as needed, and please pay attention. This is not a tool to be decided you have also to combine other analysis, like the bottom tank analysis, the leftover, excess of feeding, mortality, organic matter, all the things like that. Keep in mind that overfeed can compromise your results. So how can I score my shrimp larvae? Assume that you are sampling 10 animals. Just after sampling, immediately fix the animals, analyze them at microscope, and you score the gut from 0 to 4. And looking for the table, you have the action to perform. Here on this example, on the left side, you can see here that the animals were scored at 2 and the total was 23. So the decision was to increase on 5% the feeding rate. This is a good tool because you can do this several times per day. So you can correct for each trait, you can correct your feed offer. At the right side, when the animals were scored on 4, almost full almost full the gut, the action was to maintain the feed with the feeding table. And what is interesting for this is that the animal, if the feed has good quality and good water stability, the animal can reach the feed even after your feeding trait. After 1 hour, after 30 minutes, 50 minutes. So it keeps the animal to chase for the particles that are on the water. But remember to use a good quality feed. On this graph, you can see how it shows the scores. So what is interesting is to have a normal curve with the animals, the highest frequency of the animals scored at 3. You can see here the peak on 3, sorry. And once the curve, the animals are also has a high frequency on animals at 2, it means that it's low feed. So we have to increase your feed offer. And here is the ideal to keep your population. A practical case with nutritional trials that are performed in Brazil with Litopaneus vanamei, you are using a density 130 to 2,000 naupli per liter. Use a commercial protocol, that means algae, dry feed, Artemia, probiotics, no use of antibiotics at all. We also have a reduced water change. For us, the maximum is 30% per day, so this is quite low. We also have a reduced quantity of naupli Artemia, and animals are harvested at PL10. Doesn't matter if this lasts 15 days or 20 days, they always be harvested as PL10. And that, as you can see here, this is the carboy just after the harvest. You can see the carboy very clean, no feed, leftover feed, no organic matter. This is when you use good quality feed and you have a good protocol. Molofeed has a complete portfolio for of feed to shrimp hatchery. And just to show you some results that we compared the control group, a commercial protocol, against Molofeed's protocol. All the animals are at 8 millimeters. So at PL10, they are as large as PL12, according to Juarez and Moss. And the treatment C, Molofeed, has the lowest coefficient of variation, means that the bath was more homogeneous. And this is important to have a batch homogeneous to keep on the nursery, So do not have this difference on nursery and then on growing phase. Some other results, the treatment seed, Molofeed, has a slight increase on survival. And also the feed offer was slight lower, sorry. And also the quantity of Artemia delivered. Here is just a summary of the results with survival of above 65 and saline test stress around 98%, even after 1 hour. As take-home message, it's important to eliminate overfeeding. So reduce the cost due to leftover. Just remember, if you are feeding the animals and there is no consumption, that means that you are just throwing away our money and also polluting your water. So try to avoid overfeeding to keep your water quality and reduce the risk of contamination. And contamination means you have losses of the tank or of the batch, so reduce the risk of contamination. The rational use of Artemia naupli, so the high cost of the naupli, and also that today you have diets that can replace partially the Artemia naupli. Management, the water quality, and other management, the other SOP, a qualified team, the people that are able to solve the problems as fast as possible, cost production efficiency, and good quality of feed, and the size adequate for each phase of the animal to avoid heterogeneity of the bed, and also that animal will be able to eat this particle. And remember also the genetics. A good broodstock means good naupli. For sure, you have success on your hatchery. Thank you very much for your attention, and please contact me if you have any doubts. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is Oscar Hennig, Operations Director for Benchmark Genetics. Before joining Benchmark in 2016, and in his over 30 years experience in the shrimp farming sector, Oscar has occupied several key research, commercial, operational, and managerial positions. His main areas of expertise cover selective breeding programs, SPF stock development, and shrimp diseases. Located in Kona, Hawaii, he has managed Pineus monodon, Stylirostris, and mainly Vaname breeding programs for several prominent companies. The title of his presentation is Genetics, Nutrition, Health, and Environmental Management for Successful Harvest and Cumulative Gain in the Value Chain. Oscar, hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucia. I'll start with a quick introduction from Benchmark. Benchmark is a company with 3 main divisions: genetics, advanced nutrition, and health. On the advanced nutrition part, a key element for us, for Benchmark, we have with the INVE company, with live Artemia, hatchery, nursery diets, probiotics, and environmental treatment. On the animal health, it's mainly for fish, for salmon, but also for sea bass, sea bream, and tilapia, mainly vaccines and nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals for controlling sea lice and other problems. Now going into a bit more into my area of expertise, the genetics side. Just to put in perspective, close to 40% of all Atlantic salmon produced has benchmark participation, either through our own breeding programs or external breeding programs that we do service. So where are we? On the shrimp side, I'll focus on this. We have our Nucleus Breeding Center in Colombia. We have our Elite Multiplication Center in Florida, and our one multiplication center in Thailand. And what products do we offer? Atlantic salmon ova, and on the shrimp side, broodstock, and a small number of Pause larvae PLs in the local market, tilapia broodstock, and also genetic service. So what we have been doing is to take what was learned from the salmon industry and bringing that technology into other species. I'll be focused on shrimp in this presentation. So what we have done as the salmon industry we realized early on that genetic bioenvironmental interactions are real on the shrimp world, and one specific breed for Vename doesn't fit in all types of environment and culture practices. So we developed a balanced line, it's a balanced growth line, BMK yield, a low salinity line, a specialized growth line selected for growth and high survival in a salinity lower than 5 parts per thousand, and a resistant line selected for resistant with white spot and EMS. And we are able to do that due to the fact of our stocks in Colombia have a broad genetic base. We have a founder population that it's kept intact, from where we can spin out different lines so we can breed for today, for the problems and for the environments that we have today. We can also breed for what's coming next. Now going into the main topic of this presentation. Again, taking what was learned from the salmon, Benchmark developed a software called Breed Control. It was developed originally for the salmon industry, but we adapt and we update it for the shrimp industry. Right now, we have the maturation module done, and we are working on the larval module and the farm module. So on the maturation modules, over 50,000 data points on the KPIs for maturation performance. So we're able to track performance and compare over time per country, per client, batch, line, protocols, ablation, and non-ablation. As an example, I like to show output per country. We noticed that the same genetics, the same batches, sometimes even from the same tanks, they went to different countries. And we started noticing through this Power BI to the program that I just mentioned, we started noticing that the output was quite different from country A, let's say, and country B. So we zoom out, the main KPI is how much a brood stock, how much a female is giving me per month as far as NALPI. So that's the zoom out, and we noticed that there's big differences between the countries, again, with the same genetics. But we start zooming in and to try to understand where was the main differences. So we mating rate for country A and country B, the mating ratio is not that different, but we see these big differences in NALPI per female per spawn for country A compared to country B. So analyzing that, we focus in the management, that the differences between country A and country B, and also the nutrition profile that was being offered in both countries. And with the help, again, of our advanced nutrition division of the company, we're able to bring up the production in the country B. Now, going into something that's really close to my heart, non-ablation. all benchmark genetic shrimp sites are performing 100% non-ablation. And all benchmark genetic shrimp lines are selected for non-ablation performance. And we gladly see that the market perception is changing. Non-ablation is gaining traction due to this PL performance consideration, a more robust performance coming out, a more robust PL coming out from a non-ablated female. Again, using the software that we developed, start looking to see, okay, where are the main difference? Again, zooming out, we start seeing that the main KPI, again, is now PI per female per month. And we start seeing that, again, for the same genetics, there was a 23%, some variation, of course, but let's say 23% higher. Now I choose the country that we have received the same animals and a country that has an outstanding output on LPI per month per female. And it was roughly 23% higher. Now, again, zooming in, why? Why was that difference? And we start seeing that for LPI per female per spawn, the difference was about 5% higher. It wasn't that big of a difference. But we start seeing that the mature females, meaning what percentage of females were mature in a particular day, was over 14% higher. And based on that, we start advising our customers and using our breeding technology to start and to keep on going as well, the genetic improvement, and also changes in the sex ratio of the maturation tanks to accommodate the non-ablation, meaning you increase the sex ratio, increase the number of females per males in the tank to compensate for this maturation interval, this reduction, or actually this increase in maturation interval for females that were non-ablated. Now, one last point that I like to mention is that the 3 different lines that we are working, we seeing this very different management that needs to be done and also nutrition profile for different lines. As genetics are getting more and more apart from each line, we advise our customers and also go over their protocols to adapt for each particular line. And with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for attention, and I'll be here until the end for any questions or any concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Great presentations. For the audience, please don't forget to type your questions in the Q&A box. And let's go with our last speaker, Assaf Schechter. Assaf is co-founder and CEO of Enzootic, a biotechnology company that developed a technology for high-density all-female freshwater prawn farming. By eliminating the aggressive territorial males, farming density can be quadrupled. The title of his presentation is Freshwater Prawn High-Density Farming Redefines the Limitations of this Species. Assaf, hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Lucia, for inviting me. I am a little bit kind of humbled to be in this forum, but I'm going to also try and give another angle into prawn or shrimp farming from my perspective, which is a little bit different from the previous presenters. And the topic of my talk today is freshwater prawn high density farming. Is really based on a technology developed by Enzootic, which started its journey as a genetics company and now is a fully vertically integrated company working mostly in Thailand this time. So I'm going to try to share some of my thoughts and views on what we need to do as a farming industry And I'd like to start with a depressing report just from last week from Scientific American on the fact that scientists warn of looming mass ocean extinction of our marine life. Obviously, it's quite depressing, but it also means that we have a responsibility as aquaculture industry and professionals to make sure that there is alternatives, and we need to maybe have a proper discussion. What kind of alternatives are we going to offer when fishery is gone or when it's declined massively? And is our seafood production practices today are actually accelerating this extinction? And are we really sustainable as we claim we are, or this is just a marketing strategy? So as you know, shrimp is the most widely farmed and traded seafood commodity in this space. Over 95% of it is marine species, over 80% of it is one species, Vaname, white-layed Pacific shrimp, which is cultivated in various salinities around the world. But kind of looking forward into the future, is this the only alternative we want to keep for future generations? And are we farming the most sustainable species in the crustacean opportunities that we have in terms of aquaculture? And I want to be a promoter of diversity in this call and try to kind of highlight a species that some of you may know from Asia or living there or visited, which is freshwater prawns. One of the most amazingly delicious crustaceans that are farmed. Actually, it is the shrimp of choice in many countries around Asia, and the price and market price of these crustacean is equivalent to tiger prawn. However, it's kind of purely sold domestically in Asia. Cannot find it almost outside of Asia. I cannot find it in North America and Europe, with some exceptions from small quantities coming from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. It's actually one of the most ecological friendly species to farm because it doesn't require any kind of salinity for its grow out cycle, and you can farm it inland away from our marine ecosystems. And we are quite aware that some of the ecological damages of the effluents being discharged from marine shrimp farming could be avoided by going inland and doing only freshwater that theoretically could then be used to other agriculture purposes downstream, such as rice and soy and other plantation. So Enzootic has developed this unique technology for all-female high-density freshwater prawn farming, and I'll try to explain in a nutshell what is this technology about and what is the advantage of doing all-female and high-density. And first, you need to understand that if you look at the FAO data numbers, freshwater prawn numbers have been steady in the last 3-4 decades. It hasn't been playing a significant role in the global farm shrimp industry. And this is mainly because the farming economics of this species today or historically weren't very promising for the farmers. And this is because this is a highly social organism where there's a social complexity between males and females, male between themselves into who is able to reproduce. Males tend to be very aggressive and territorial, and not less important, reproduction in this mixed sex population species starts very early in the grow out cycle. So the three main advantages of eliminating males from the pond and moving into monosex all-female technology or culturing is, first of all, energy. And I'll explain. When you are a farmer, you want all of the energy that you are putting in the water, being mostly feed, will be converted into somatic growth. So you want the animals to reach market size as quick as possible. Any loss of energy towards reproduction-related behavior, meaning courtship and mating and egg bearing and territorial competition between the males, all of that is energy lost. And you want all the energy to be diverted towards growth. So having those males away from the pond gives you an ability to direct the energy where you want it to go. Density could be quadrupled when you eliminate the males. Males in many ways are the defining factor of the density. Because of that territorial behavior, they are defining the density the farmers could stock. Eventually that led to the uneconomical approach of farming mixed sex population. And last but not least, uniformity of females is much higher because they don't have that aggressive territorial behavior where they need to compete between themselves for their size. So energy density and uniformity. And what we are saying that freshwater prawns, high density farming is about volume and not about size. And the technology that we developed in Enzootic really taps into the natural sexual plasticity of crustacean that enables them to be either a female or male externally, regardless of their genetic composition. It's a very elegant technology. We don't use any kind of chemicals. We don't use any kind of hormones, and it's not involving any kind of genetic modification whatsoever. The technology is fully transparent. It's one of our strategic decisions back in the days when we developed the technology. It's published in numerous scientific peer review journals, and also in Aquaculture magazine in many, many languages. So we want people to understand this technology and why this is not any kind of genetic modification or editing or anything on that side. A little bit about the validation. This is a comparison between mixed sex and all female population of freshwater prawns. You can see the blue line represents the size distribution when we harvest of a mixed sex population. There are some large animals above 100 grams. Those are the dominating males in the pond. They are effectively inhibiting the growth of other males. And the large peak in the middle you see here is basically females. About 70% of them will be carrying eggs at harvest day. So this is not very effective. About 20% of the males decide to stay small, so they're going to be quick enough to put their sperm on the females, even when the large male is guarding them. So you can see mixed sex population is a very inefficient strategy. Looking at the green line, you can see whole female. Obviously, we're losing those high average animals at around 100 grams, and the females tend to be about 40 grams. We can hardly find any egg-bearing females when there's no males around. So you see uniformity of this crop. In every parameter that we've tested in monosex, all female versus mixed populations, from density to FCR to survival, all the parameters were superior to this strategy. So I'm going to try to give you also an understanding of what is the challenge for convincing farmers in Thailand, for example, to work with all female high density populations. And as I said, we're targeting volumes, not size. This is what you can see, the size categories at harvest day in Thailand. And you can see that the larger animals are getting obviously a disproportionate money out of their volume in the pond, because we know size categories, especially in Thailand, play a huge difference on the price. So at 8 crowns, at 125 grams, you see almost 10% of the value generated from the pond come from that size, although it's not represented in the volume coming from that size category from the pond. Looking at the size categories, you see the larger animals are getting better prices. And as we go down into the 25 counts and 30 counts, those are actually getting the inferior prices in the market. And this is what we're trying to explain to farmers, and you'll see in a second how they can make more money out of it. But right now, the domestic consumption in Asia and the demand is for larger animals, and that defines eventually the densities that you farm the animal and the length of the grow-out cycle. And you can see that a typical farm in Thailand would have about 180 days of monoculture of freshwater prawn. They could extract about 464 kilogram per rye per cycle, two cycles a year. And the average size at harvest would be around 60 grams at stocking density of about 4 animals per square meter. That generates about 55,000 Thai bahts per rye per cycle using the traditional mixed sex population. What we are trying to convince farmers is to walk kind of at the belief that they can grow volumes and still make a lot more money without going into those high average sizes they're typically focusing on. And you can see that the all-female high density strategy is a little bit different. We're only targeting the 30 count and the 25 count at harvest, which means that this is a completely different strategy for the farmer, who is usually prefers the large animals. But we're offering them to put 16 animals per square meter instead of 4, so quadrupling the density. But then you see the average size drops to 38.6 grams. The harvesting day is 120 days from stocking. That means you can add another cycles in places like Thailand. Eventually, you're harvesting about 750 kg per rye per cycles. And with 3 cycles a year, and every cycle producing about 140,000 Thai bahts, you see that there is a huge increment in how much that farmer is able to generate from his farm, from mixed sex population moving into high density all-female population. So this is the economic validation. In terms of you farmers out there in Thailand that want to work with us, what should be the expectation? Working with Enzootic 4X juveniles, that's the trademark for the high density juveniles that we're selling. It's a high density line. We provide the juveniles at about 1 gram size, stocking for 120 days in earthen ponds. We prefer that farmers would use 0 PPT, no salinity, and if they can then use the water downstream to other agriculture purposes, we think it's beautiful. We also recommend not to use any chemicals and antibiotics, of course. Average size target is about 35 grams. Which is the inferior size category in Thailand. We'll get there in a second. And harvesting production output is about 750 kg per rye per cycles with 3 cycles a year. FCR at about 1.5 and the average farm gate prices for freshwater prawns are about 250 Thai bahts per kg if you work with Enzootic, because we also have a buyback mechanism. So we're looking for farmers who are placed close to freshwater areas where they can be as far away from the ocean. We don't mind. We want to kind of market the farmers we work with as an ocean-free premium, and then we buy the animals from them at the end of the grow-out season under our Enzootic quality brand called Queen Prawn, and we engage in contract farming with these entities. Just to give you a little bit understanding of what is the engagement model, Enzootic operates its own nucleus breeding center where we provide the genetics into our hatcheries and nurseries that are then producing the seed. We also work with some of the feed companies to provide performance feed to farmers. And then eventually Enzootic has also the ability to export the product to North America and Europe, which are the main consumer markets we are targeting. And in addition, we are trying to find farmers right now in Thailand, but we are hopefully going to extend that into other countries to work with us under the contract farming agreement. We would then harvest the animals live at the end of the grow-out season, bring them into our live logistical storage area where we screen for quality for any use of chemicals and antibiotics. And if they meet our quality criteria, we then process the animals under the Queen Prawn brand, and then we distribute it through our marketing channels abroad. This is Queen Prawn by Enzootic. It's a new seafood product we are now pushing into those markets I mentioned. It's a relatively kind of different approach to freshwater prawn farming, processing, and exporting. Right now, we're operating only from Thailand, but we anticipate in the coming years to expand to at least 2 other territories in Southeast Asia. That's it. That's what we try to do. It's a little bit different from the Vaname space. It has a lot of both sustainability values, and also we believe it's also important in terms of diversity of the crustacean that we farm and we put for seafood lovers across the world to enjoy. So thank you. And anyone has any specific questions, feel free to contact us through our email below. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Assaf, and thank you all for the great presentations. I would like to ask our panelists to turn on their videos to begin the Q&A session. And here is the first question for Eamonn. One of our participants wants to know your thoughts on comparing using polycats feed and comparing it with artificial feeds for shrimp broodstock.
Yep. Typically, you can replace the polychaetes. It all really depends on the quality of the polychaetes that are available. Very often they can become, during the rainy season, a bottleneck for production. They're not lack of availability. So people have to replace them anyway. Generally, performance indicators, all the KPIs are typically around about the same. Certainly in Latin America, all of the trials that we've done there at commercial scale show that you can just replace all of the polychaetes, also the mussels and oysters and so on, Artemia biomass, and just use squid together with the Vitalis 2.5 diet. But like I showed in my presentation as well, if you are using polychaetes, you can actually supercharge them as well by complementing them with a high-end diet as well. And I think as an industry, we have to anyway move towards formulated high-end diets, like what Oscar was saying as well, with specific diets tailored to genetic lines and so on. The use of fresh raw materials like this that potentially can be contaminated with shrimp pathogens and so on it's just not the way to go for a sustainable industry.
Okay, thank you. Question for Luis. There were several questions about your sampling methods and how do you score gut fullness. One of the participants said that they found that when they anesthetize the shrimp, their guts still pooped, so it's hard to sample full guts. And they also are asking how many samples do you examine to take the average score for a tank?
Thank you. I just reply some of the questions. Concerning to the sampling, the number of sampling, I used to say that the normal daily evaluation, the number of larvae, but I'd say that 50 larvae, it's okay. It's okay to have an idea of the good content and the population. Concerning to the other one, about the gut evacuation, this is recommended to fix the sample with acid or formaldehyde 4%. But you have to fix immediately after sampling to avoid the gut evacuation.
Okay, good. Oscar, there are several questions about non-ablation shrimp. So the first one will be, do you know how this adoption of non-ablation affects production cost?
Yeah, roughly between 20 and 30% of loss of NALPI output that has to be compensated by, like I said, one of the simplest way is to compensate by increasing the number of females, the sex ratio for the female, and also nutrition, special nutritions for the females, for them to be able to come up or to have a shortened interval. But the short answer is roughly between 20 and 30%. A decrease in NALPI production.
Okay, and what is the best sex ratio for broodstock for ablated and non-ablated females?
What we are suggesting and giving our clients 20% extra females.
Okay. Assaf, how you compare the performance and yield versus all male population?
Yes, so all male technology does exist. It's an RNAi-based technology developed about 12 years ago, but it's a completely different strategy from our perspective. All male still focuses on growing animals to sizes which are 80 gram, 100 gram. It's a completely different strategy. You need to keep the density still low, even if you don't have females around. Whereas high density all female is really targeting export size, 35 gram animals at high volumes. It's completely different strategy. So if you are a farmer who is based in Southeast Asia, who are catering the domestic demand, which is primarily large animals, definitely all male is a better strategy than mixed sex population. If you're working with Enzootic, where you want to create volumes and work through export size to 35 gram, then you want to increase density because size doesn't play that big a factor anymore. So these are two strategies that from our point of view coexist quite nicely together.
Okay, thank you, Assaf. Eamonn, here's another question. Can you suggest an efficient disinfection procedure for Artemia before feeding them to shrimp? You're muted.
Yeah, I gave a link for that in the question and answer session. So if you just have a look in that, you'll see the question is actually answered. It was from Aquaculture, I think it's 232 from 2004. There's a paper there on disinfection of ungrown Artemia.
Okay, thank you. They will have a look at that. Luis, can you explain how feeding strategy compromised the survival and growth of cultures?
Yeah, because I'm pushing the touch to say about the overfeeding or using also a bad quality feed. It's kind of water pollution and increasing the bacterial load, sorry, organic matter load. So when you're using microencapsulated feed, that are feed that is very stable on the water, no nutrient leach deviation, you can keep your water and the environment on better conditions, as well as like this, you can improve your survival.
Okay, thank you. Oscar, can you share more insights about the nutritional development of specific genetic lines?
Yes. So for instance, if you take the Protect, which is a resistant line for white spot and EMS, our recommendations is to increase the temperature to 30, 32 in the early stages until mysis to speed up the metamorphosis and to get the larvae developing faster, and also keep an eye on overfeeding, because again, it's an animal that doesn't grow as fast as the growth line or the balance line, so it needs to be fine-tune the amount of feeds that you'd be using, because it's quite easy to overfeed that particular line. So as an example, BMK Protect, our resistant line, needs to be carefully fine-tune the feeding regime, so not to overfeed the animal.
Okay. Assaf, female freshwater prawns tend to grow slower than males. How is this strategy still effective? And what are the recommended stocking size, grow-out duration, and target size at harvest?
Right. So I tried to cover it in my conversation, but kind of to give a reminder, the density we're targeting is about 60 nanomolars per square meter, 120 days, 35 grams. So indeed, farmers that are kind of focused on growth rate and they used to grow mixed sex population, some of the males that they farmed when they're doing mixed sex population tend to grow faster. Females in general will grow on an average base that will get them to about 35 grams at 120 days, but it's going to be very uniform with hardly any size deviation from that size category. So in terms of density, you can anticipate quadrupling your density, but in terms of average size, since females don't grow as fast, it's going to get them only to 35 grams, which if you're targeting export markets, that's an ideal size.
Okay, thank you. Eamonn, here's a question for you. I'm feeding mixtures of different diets. Why should I change it?
Yeah, it leads to a lot of instability and variation in output. What we see is that these cocktails are just generally what the rationale behind it is, that people seem to think that, well, if I hedge my bets on all of the different diets and put them all a bit together, something that might be lacking in one diet will be compensated by another diet. where the reality is all you're doing is diluting it actually down even further. So it's really not the best strategy to take. Of course, there are the commercial implications of saying, you know, I want to work with different vendors or a number of different vendors. But then I would strongly recommend not to mix the diets and just say, okay, work with for this batch with that vendor and that batch with that vendor, for instance. But mixing the diets together leads to a lot of extra work as well, and a lot of hidden costs and extra logistics.
Good. Luis, how much is this? Oh, sorry. Where is Molofeed producing the feeds, and what are the markets you are delivering to?
The industry is based on Norway, Stavanger, Bergen, and the feed are delivered today mainly to Brazil and India. But this is more related with the with the documentation of each country. We can deliver for anywhere.
Okay, thank you. Oscar, how 3 breeding lice are kept maintained? Do you still have how the 3 breeding lice are kept together, and how do you keep a pure line when you have all together, all grown together? I think it's a bit hard, but I think they are asking about how you manage the 3 breeding lice that you have.
So the genetic diversity is kept on our nucleus breeding center. And from those animals, we spin out the lines. So the lines are totally different, meaning in a way they are selected and they are developed for different environments and different management practice. So not 100% clear if I understood the question, but yes, our nucleus population, we keep the genetic diversity there intact or developed to a sense that we can keep on spinning different lines. The commercial lines, that's what we sell for the terminal generation to be produced in the hatcheries. But yes, the lines pure lines are kept separate.
Okay, thank you. Assaf, question for you. What are the main challenges of raising giant freshwater prawn? Is susceptible to diseases?
Yes, I think so. As a general statement.
You're muted, Assaf.
Am I muted?
Yeah. Okay, it's
okay.
going.
Sorry. So I think as a general statement, and I hope the Vanami guys here will agree with me, freshwater prawns tend to be less susceptible to disease than Vanami and Monodon. They tend to be more hardy animals. Obviously, the magnitude of farming this organism isn't as big as Vanami and Monodon, and therefore the susceptibility of disease in general in a smaller industry is decreased. Vanami, as we know, we're old enough to remember EMS a while ago wiped out countries like Thailand from production of Vanami. So when you have a bigger industry, the challenges of disease are greater. And in general, the freshwater prawns are slightly hardy animals than their marine cousins.
Okay, good perspectives. Eamonn, how do you see the evolution of Artemia in shrimp production?
Good question. I think if we look at the total Artemia production today, it's around about plus minus 3,000 tons per year. This is met by the industry today, but I think we're getting very close to maximum sustainable yield. There are other resources, I suppose, that can be explored, but at what cost as well. So I think Artemia will continue to play a role somehow within the industry, and it has obviously done an amazing job to facilitate where we are today. But longer term, we will need alternatives. And it's not, as I said in my presentation, it's not about getting rid of Artemia. It's about having flexibility to be able to produce animals when you need at the right price and also with the right quality as well.
Okay, thank you. Luis, it's another question. How can microencapsulated feed help maintain water quality?
This is a good question. Microencapsulated feed has more water stability, so no nutrient leaching. So this helps to keep the water on better conditions.
Okay, thank you. Oscar, there are several questions about your low salinity lines, and they would like to know a bit more of how the farm outputs of comparing low salinity and high salinity shrimp lines.
Okay, as a general, both the low salinity and the resistant lines, they have, compared to our growth line, to our balance line, they have a lower growth rate. So what needs to be understood is that the farmers need to see what environment that they are using. So specific for low salinity, we select for extreme below 5 parts per thousand. So between 0 and 5 parts per thousand, constant low salinity. That's the target environment for this particular line. With that said, it does reduce, you have a robustness improvement and a condition for that particular environment, but that comes with a slightly cost on the growth rate for that line.
Okay, thank you. Assaf, what are farm gate prices of freshwater prawns closer to monodon or to Baname?
I think it's quite clear that Baname prices is a commodity. It's a global commodity. So prices fluctuate based on the abilities of countries to produce quantities in different times of the year. It's a really large global trade. Monodon prices tend to be usually higher, and freshwater prawns tend to be closer to monodon farm gate prices. And as we said, there's no exporting of this product yet, really, in volumes. So it's hard to say what's the retail price, but in terms of farm gate prices, it is clear that freshwater prawns market prices are almost similar to the ones that the monodon market gets.
Okay, thank you. Well, a wide part of our audience is from India and from the Philippines, and some of them are asking, especially for benchmark, if your SPF shrimp is available in those markets in India and in the Philippines.
It's available in India and it's also available in the Philippines. We have the export license for both countries.
Okay.
Just contact me and then we go from there.
And a question for the three shrimp guys, for the three Baname guys, is this India hatcheries are suffering heart disease outbreaks. So what do you think needs to be done to improve Indian hatcheries management and how your companies can help? Eamonn?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's very sad to see that India is experiencing these things, but there are a number of different critical bottlenecks. You know, all of the Baname broodstock are imported into India. They go through a very strict quarantine procedure where they're maintained in very nice conditions and fed very, very clean feeds. But then at a farm level, unfortunately, they get exposed to various potentially contaminated feeds. So that is one area where the pathogens can enter the hatchery. Another area is on water quality. A lot of the hatcheries are situated side by side, not uncommon, in fact, in shrimp hatchery countries. But you need to pay close attention to the water quality coming into the farm, making sure that it's properly filtered and properly disinfected. Need also to make sure that the procedures in place on the farm are being respected with proper disinfection, sanitary biosecurity measures. The quality of the live feed that's being used as well. Make sure that the Artemia is disinfected. It's a very, very big source of Vibrio. And again, also the quality of the dry feeds that are being utilized. Make sure that they are good quality, that you're not overfeeding, not spoiling water quality. Microalgae is something that tends to be overlooked a lot as well. It's grown typically outside, it's exposed to the environment. So it can be a source of significant contamination into the hatchery as well. So lots of many different factors that all have to be managed to make sure that the animals don't come out of the hatchery sick. You want to make sure that you've got strong, robust animals coming out.
Okay, Oscar.
I agree with Eamonn when he presented the three pillars for a successful hatchery. Yes, you start with clean animals, but you need clean environment and clean feeds as well. It has been my experience in the first couple trips I done with the SPF animals that we kept and we sold. And the first thing that the client, the hatchery, does is to start feeding them fresh feed or live feed. And you go through all this process of keeping the animals disease free, and the first thing that it happens is fresh feed or live feed be introduced to the animals. And then the answer that I got to my question all the time was, don't worry, Oscar, we tested our fresh feeds or live feeds, we tested by PCR. But my answer back is that you tested for what you know, you cannot test it for what you don't know. And every couple of years, you have a new acronym, a new disease coming and popping up. So start with clean animals, keep your environment clean, and also your feed, your inputs clean as well.
Okay, Luis, you wanna share your thoughts?
Yeah, very good points done by Eamonn and Oscar. And is really this is the three pillars. So I cannot push just one. I have to pay attention all of them. So try to work with clean animals, the genetic. I also need to have to pay attention on my management, the water quality. And for sure, I cannot forget the feed. That is a huge problem when I fed with fresh feed and also live feed. So this try to keep the 3 points and push each one at the maximum.
Okay, thank you. Assaf, what are the rates of cannibalism in prawn PLs?
Yeah, those could be quite high. I mean, we generally recommend stocking in a grow-out pond no smaller than 1 gram at least. We have in Enzootic our own nursery farms where we keep the animal for 45 days until they get to 1 gram. And we believe that also in the nursery phase and to some extent also in the earthen ponds, substrate is not used enough to kind of enable those younger animals to molt frequently, to grow fast. And adding substrate to both nursery and grow out, especially in freshwater prawns, which they don't swim like Vanami and they need larger surface area to walk on and to molt, is an important factor in survival. Cannibalism of freshwater prawns, PLs, is very, very high at this stage. So enough surface area and hiding places during molting will increase survival dramatically.
Okay, thank you. There's another question about probiotics. Some people from our audience are asking how to apply them through feeding or in the water body. I think Oscar and Eamonn, you can both answer. Oscar, Benchmark, and Inve has this kind of products?
Yes, from both. You have probiotics to be introduced with the feed or in feeds already, like ProTab, but also for the water quality as well. So you can use, depending on what is your objective, if it's to colonize the guts of the shrimp, or if it is to give the environment, the water environment, you have the two alternatives. So you can use it as a feed supplement, specific probiotics, or as a water quality, a water conditioning as well.
Eamonn?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing I can add to that. I mean, Oscar has it perfectly, of course. So yeah, it's just like that, as Oscar says. Feed coating for colonizing gut bacteria, and then other probiotics that will, for instance, break down ammonia or deal with the biological profile within the substrate.
Okay, and one last question to Assaf. Is freshwater prawn can be grown in a RAS system, a biofloc, and the pros and cons of these systems?
Yeah, so definitely farming indoor.
Okay.
No, I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay. So definitely farming freshwater prawns inland holds a big promise because you don't need any salt. You can basically do it anywhere you have tap drinking water. It's really a question about how far could you push the density to justify the capital expenditures and the operational expenditures of indoor RAS systems. In general, I'm not aware of biofloc system doing freshwater prawns. I don't think the biology of this particular species enables it to push it to densities that can start enjoying the benefits of bioflocs like Vaname do. But a RAS system, we use RAS system in all of our units, both hatchery and also our nucleus breeding center. And definitely RAS using freshwater is a much easier process than doing saltwater RAS. So there's a lot of advantages why using RAS. I think that in long term, there's going to be indoor farming of freshwater prawns. In a larger extent, obviously, it's going to be done in markets that could pay premium for the final product coming from that operation. But yes, RAS system is the future to some extent.
Well, thank you. I think that wraps up the Q&A. For those questions that were not answered live, they will be answered by email. I would like to thank our speakers today, Eamonn, Luis, Oscar, and Assaf, for your time and the great presentations, and to our sponsors, Benchmark Genetics, Molofeed, and Skretting. And thanks everyone for joining in. The recording will be available on YouTube soon, and our next webinar will take place tomorrow at the same time. Don't miss the second session on shrimp feeds and genetics. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest news on aquaculture hatcheries, don't forget to subscribe to our publications on hatcheryfm.com. Take care, everybody, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Bye-bye.
Bye.